We're just so delighted to be hosting this important evening with Nadav in dialogue. We're so grateful to Michael and Diane. We're so grateful to J Street for bringing us Nadav. I was just wondering, Eliza Berger, if you could start us off with a little nigun that would get us in the right frame of mind, and then we can launch the evening.
Please join in.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone, and I guess we'll start off by inviting Diane and Michael to kind of kick us off.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Gardner. My wife, Diane. I was originally going to do the singing, and Eliza was going to do the introduction. But at the last minute, they changed that, so I'll just do the introduction. First of all, I want to thank Rabbis Eliza and Wes for making this this evening possible. It marks a real step for Temple Emmanuel, and I really appreciate, we really appreciate them doing this. So thank you. And I want to thank all of you for coming out on a cold night and listening to Nadav and hearing about J Street. It's really nice having you all here. So thank you. You know, I imagine yourselves as well as Diane and I have the same dreams and aspirations for Israel that we have. We want an Israel that is secure, with secure borders, is safe, is militarily strong, continues in a relationship with the United States, where military aid of $3.3 billion a year plus $500 million a year of missile defense continues. We also want an Israel that will be an eternal homeland for Jewish people throughout the world. And we also want a homeland, we also want an Israel that respects and honors the civil rights of all of its citizens. We were trying to find a home that would be comfortable for us to advocate for those aspects and achieve those dreams for Israel in a way that allows us to do so while honoring our understanding of Jewish values and our understanding of American values. And I will say that we have found that home in J Street. And I want to thank you again for coming. Hope that you will be able to take in what's here today and have an open mind about what you hear tonight. I will tell you that there'll be a clipboard that will be going around for those of you who are interested in learning more or getting more involved. And as a special added treat, you will have the opportunity to speak with Ambassador Alice Salamont, who is the chairman of the board of J Street. Should you have any questions, concerns, gripes, anything, you can just bring it to Ambassador Allen's attention, and he will take immediate care of it. So again, thank you so much for being here.
So it's my privilege to introduce Nadav Tamir, who may not need any introduction. Many of us have known of him or heard him speak for years. He was the Israeli Consul General for New England from 2006 to 2010, and he is now the Executive Director of J Street Israel. He's also an advisor on international affairs to the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation. We are thrilled that you're here in dialogue with our own beloved Rabbi Gardenswartz, and we promise it's going to be very interesting.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. So, Nadav, first of all, just welcome to Temple Emmanuel. And again, we're so delighted to have you here. I thought maybe we'll just do a quick root wrap so folks can understand what we'll be talking about. I think that there's kind of going to be like 4 buckets of questions I'll ask you about. One is kind of your personal biography, your Israeliness, your Israeli story. When we last saw you, at Temple Emmanuel, you were Consul General of New England. You were the face of Israel. And you spoke to us actually on Yom Kippur Day. right before Ne'ilah at our most holy hour. And it's just such an interesting story, which I don't know the answer to, of how you went from Consul General to lobbying, and once you were at lobbying, J Street, etc., and tell us about your work and your trajectory and your Israeliness. That's the first thing, personal biography. Second question, I want to talk about troubling energies from the right in Israel, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, etc. Troubling energies from the left, Squad, AOC, Bernie, Wellesley, college campuses, and how you think about the troubling energies from both right and left. And then we're going to end by talking about what can we, the troubled committed, love Israel, committed to Israel, also troubled, and what we can do to support Israel and strengthen Israel. We're going to talk about the two-state solution. Is it alive? Is it dead? We're going to talk about shrink the conflict, Micha Goodman's idea, what you think about it. We're going to talk about what does Israel's very sorry experience withdrawing from Gaza suggest about withdrawing from anywhere else, etc. So those are going to be kind of the 4 buckets of questions. So let's start with personal biography. Nothing is as unassailable and unimpeachable as personal biography. Your Israeliness is just deep, and it goes to your core. Tell us kind of your Israeli story.
Here?
Oh, and you have you've got that right there.
Okay. Can you all hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, Rabbi. I always admired your leadership and your devotion to Israel.
Could you say more, please?
I would say that with all my admiration, I was never able to pronounce your last name.
Yeah, neither, my wife can't either, which is why she didn't take it, but continue.
And thank you, Eliza, and thank you for our J Street supporters and for everybody who came. And I know that all of us here in this room care deeply about Israel. So my story is that I was born on a kibbutz on the border of Lebanon. My parents, who were Sabras, Palestinians, you might say, actually established the kibbutz in 43, 5 years before the state of Israel was established. And I grew there on the border of Lebanon. A big part of my life was in shelters. And later I went to a gap year and got to my military service, and I asked where I would be a commander the fastest. They told me in the armored forces, so I joined the armored forces, and I eventually finished my service as a major in the Golan Heights, but also participated in the First Lebanon War. Then, you know, like many Israelis, traveled around the world, South America, and after backpacking in South America, I came to New York. And I fell in love with your country. I understood why Jews call it the Golden Medina. And I decided that I really want to deal with US-Israel relations when I grow up. I came back to Israel. I studied philosophy and political science in Hebrew University. And then I heard about the course for diplomats in the foreign ministry. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm interested in. So I passed the exams. But then when I was almost there, my wife was accepted to Columbia University to do her master's in dance education. So we went to New York for 2.5 years. My daughter Maya was born there. And then we came back to Israel, and I did join the foreign ministry. And when I finished the cadet course, I was told that the foreign minister asked that they will send him someone fresh from the course who was not tainted by the bureaucracy yet. And they sent me, and I joined the office of Foreign Minister Shimon Peres in the days after Oslo, when everything was so hopeful, and it was also the only time in Israel's history that the foreign ministry was actually leading on core issues. So it was an amazing way to start my career, and I, of course, got the bug of the peace process very much in my veins. But then we had the Rabin assassination. Peres went to be prime minister. I remained in the foreign minister's office with Ehud Barak, who came to be foreign minister after being the most decorated soldier in Israel's history, but he wasn't as interested in diplomacy. And then my friends from the Corps started to go to different countries around the world, but I was obsessed that I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. And you usually don't go to Washington, D.C. in your first post abroad. But I was in the foreign minister's office. I had some leverage. So I eventually did go to Washington, D.C. And I was there for 4 years, learning so much about American politics and about American foreign policy, and learning about the exceptionalism of American foreign policy and how America can make a change in the world.
So Nadav, so you've got all this experience in the diplomatic corps. Talk to us about what caused your trajectory from the diplomatic corps to the world of lobbying, and from the Consul General's office to the world of J Street.
Sure. So in Washington, I was exposed to the Jewish community for the first time in my life. But back then, I felt more I treated the Jewish community in a more instrumental way. I felt the Jews were our way to get to Congress, the Jews were our way to get to the media, to government, and I was amazed by the power that I was sitting in AIPAC conferences, and I used to look at other diplomats looking at me envious when they saw how every member of Congress tried to prove that they're more pro-Israeli than the other. And I said, wow, we could do so much with that. But later on, when I came to Boston for the first time as a Wexner Fellow, I did my master's at the Kennedy School of Government. I started to get to know the Jewish community in a way that I did not know before. And that changed my perspective in some ways. The first thing is that I learned that we cannot treat you guys instrumentally, that we're brothers and sisters and we're an extended family. And the fact that too many Israelis treat you as either an ATM or a lobby or a reservoir for immigration is the wrong way to treat your family, and that we should have to care much more about what you think and what you aspire, and not just expect you to care about us. So this whole Jewish peoplehood thing was something that I learned here. The other thing that I learned is that the Jewish community was much different than the organization that I met in Washington. And that I met so many Jews who were conflicted because they loved Israel, but they were told that there is only one way to love Israel. And they couldn't find a way to keep their liberal values and support Israel in the way that they were asked for. And many of them decided to either give up on Israel or even move to the anti-Zionist camp. And I felt, wow, this is a problem. And those organizations that I met in Washington are not representative of the Jewish community. They're met in the grassroots level. And then when I came here as Consul General, few things happened. First of all, there was a change in governments in Israel. And the government that I was sent by here, Tzipi Livni was foreign minister, was really working hard to achieve peace, which I thought was the most important thing for Israel's future as a homeland for the Jewish people and a democracy. And the government that replaced Olmert and Livni took a completely other direction. Both on the Palestinian issue, on the Iranian issue, I think completely gave up the bipartisan approach that we learned as diplomats that we should have. But I still felt that even though it became so much harder for me to represent those views, I have to do it from within and try to somehow, but it became harder and harder.
Yeah. So Nadav, I want to double click on part of the narrative that you mentioned and get right into, in some ways, the heart of the matter. You talked about Oslo and the hopefulness of Oslo. So, we started with the importance of personal biography. So I want to just share my vignette of Oslo, which was I was a first-year seminary student, and I remember, the handshake on the White House lawn and the optimism. And then there was a young woman named Sarah Duker, who was from Teaneck, New Jersey, where I was living, and she had a boyfriend named Matthew Eisenfeld, who was a seminary student. They were tremendously idealistic, and they were living in Israel for the year. And in the wake of Oslo, Erev Purim, they were murdered, literally blown to pieces on bus number 18. And that's been like my formative experience of Palestinian and Arab resistance to Israel and the use of violence to derail. And then this year, in the course of Israel at 75, we're reading Danny Gordis's, I think, quite excellent one-volume history about Israel. And it's just a through line from Hebron in the 20s to the anti-Israel riots of Arabs in 36 to 39, to the first Intifada, the second Intifada. And right now, we're living in a season where the IDF estimates a 300% increase in terrorism by Palestinians against Jews. And so here's my question to you. Is peace possible given that propensity for violence, which has happened from the very beginning? It killed Sarah Duker, it killed Matt Eisenfeld, it killed Aryeh Shupak, who's 16 years old. Many of us had children. Could you imagine a 16-year-old? You send a 16-year-old student to study yeshiva in Israel from Canada, and he's dead like last week. Given that, how do you make peace?
Okay, first of all, I would say that you know, the story that you tell is very much the story that I lived. I was in Israel during many of those terrorist events, and it was awful. But I have to say that the picture that I know about the situation is much more nuanced than what you presented.
Please.
I actually feel, and this is one of the things that I understood and that kind of led me to J Street, that many of those organizations that I met when I was in Washington, they see the reality in this very much way, that Israel is this small country surrounded by enemies who hate us and want to throw us to the sea. And I think it was very much the story in the beginning of Israel, but it's not the case anymore. It's not the case before, because Israel is not this weak country surrounded by enemies. Israel is a regional superpower with one of the most strongest militaries ever in the world, with ability to deal with, and it's not only me that say it, if you'll interview 95% of the IDF, Mossad, Shabak, people who are not in uniform, because in uniform you cannot speak, they will tell you that Israel was never as secure as today, and never stronger than all its enemies. And when I ask myself, what is the biggest danger to the future of my country? I think that it's not the terrorism, which is always awful, and we have to do whatever we can. I'm not a pacifist. I was a major in the IDF, and my children, my daughter Naama was here, and my son was in a combat unit, in a commando unit. We're not pacifists. But if I'm asking myself, what is the biggest danger to Israel? It's not terrorism. The biggest danger for Israel is if we will lose our identity as both a homeland for the Jewish people and a democracy. And this is, for me, an existential threat. This is not like terrorism, which is, it's awful and we have to fight it. This is existential.
So, Nadav, I hear you. A few questions. What's the light that the Hitnakut, the withdrawal from Gaza, sheds on our world today? Because, you know, it's kind of striking that Ariel Sharon, the bulldozer, gets elected on a promise we're never going to get out of Gaza. And he's like, you're strongest guy. And he gets elected, and then he says, we got to get out of Gaza. Well, you said you weren't going to get out of Gaza. Well, I see now what I didn't see then. And he uses his, like Nixon making peace with China, to get Israel out of Gaza. And then we got 4 wars, and not 10,000 missiles, but 10,000s, thousands of missiles on Sderot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, we're a regional superpower, but the hatred is there, the violence is there. I'm not an Israeli, but if I'm looking at that picture, Gaza's withdrawal and 4 wars and 10,000s and more than that of missiles makes me think withdrawal is not such a great idea. Maybe peace isn't so possible. Could you talk about Gaza and the light it sheds?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I think that if Sharon would have been alive today, he would still be very happy.
Can I have a microphone? Because David is suggesting that you can't. Yeah.
If you can. This must be Iranian cyber. Right here.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So what's the light that sheds?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that if Sharon would have been alive today, he would have said that he's very happy that Israel left Gaza, but it should have been done differently. By the way, I don't know of any serious general who's not in politics that would say that it was a mistake to leave Gaza. And when you spoke about the statistics and the numbers, I could tell you that if you look at the statistics, much more Israelis died when we were in Gaza than after leaving Gaza. And when our settlers were in there among the refugees camps, it was much, much harder to control the situation. Now, the way we should have left Gaza is in the way that will not empower Hamas, because this is what we did. We're just leaving the keys behind. We're not trying to empower a partner. We're just leaving, and then Hamas used this to say, you see, it was terrorism that drove Israel away. And since then, Hamas is controlling Gaza. And Hamas, of course, is not the answer. The answer is those Palestinians in the PA that, that some people say, oh, they never, but they actually accepted Israel in 88, in 93. They're not going to invest, in JNF anytime soon. They're not Zionists, but they truly believe that the best solution to their problems is a diplomatic solution.
So Nadav,
yeah.
you know so much more about this in your fingernail than I know in my whole body with a library at my side. So forgive the question, but as I remember it, when Ehud Barak was prime minister, he offered, you talk about the PA. The PA is not Hamas, okay? He offered Arafat, who was the PA, was he not? He offered Arafat and the PA a peace deal, including 96% of what they wanted, including sharing sovereignty of Jerusalem, which now would be unthinkable, but Ehud Barak, as prime minister, offered to divide sovereignty of Jerusalem, and Arafat said no, and we got an intifada. So I guess I'm wondering, where is this peace possibility?
So I'll say two things about Camp David and about Arafat. First of all, I think today most people understand that Camp David had no chance of success, because the thought that you could have a bilateral peace with the Palestinians that is not involving the regional players is just a fantasy. And I know Barak is brilliant. I worked with him. The problem is he's brilliant in his own mind, and he doesn't really understand the situation around him. And this is why he was able to convince Clinton that if we bring Arafat and myself here, we will be able to change the Middle East. You cannot, because the refugee issue, the Jerusalem issue, and even the security issue are very much connected to Jordan and Egypt. And this whole regional situation changed completely since there. And now everybody understands that any peace will involve the regional players, and the regional players have changed dramatically from the 3 no's of Khartoum after the 6 Days War, when they said no to Israel, no to recognition, no to peace, to a region that now really want to solve this problem and that put an Arab initiative on the table in 2002. And I think that the way Israel dismissed or never answered that proposal is equal to the big mistake that the Arabs did when the UN had the partition war. And the other thing that I want to say about Arafat, I know Arafat well. Peres was negotiating him. Peres was my mentor. But Arafat was indeed one day a terrorist and one day a statesman. Abbas, who replaced him, was completely different. Abbas thought that terrorism was the biggest mistakes of the Palestinians. Abbas thought the intifadas gave nothing to the Palestinians. Abbas, until now, even when he's so unpopular and most Palestinians think that he's a collaborator, is still giving orders to the Palestinian forces to work with Israel against terrorism. And in all of those years, what Israel did, unfortunately, because I'm talking about the country that I dearly love, we only empowered Hamas instead of empowering the Palestinians who really wanted diplomacy, not because they're Zionists, because they understand that their only future for them and the only right, the way to implement the right for self-determination is in diplomacy, and Israel was not there to answer them.
All right, so Nadav, this is such an interesting conversation. Again, I'm so glad you're here. I thought it's kind of a verity, it's just a given, that the two-state solution is dead, 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 D-E-A, dead. It's dead because the Jews don't want it, it's dead because the Palestinians don't want it, it's dead. D-E-A-D, first intifada, second intifada, D-E-A-D, dead. And what has replaced it as kind of the horizon of hopeful is, Micha Goodman's idea of shrinking the conflict. And when Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, for one halcyon moment, formed this hopeful government, what was on the table was not two-state solution, which is dead, but what was on the table was shrinking the conflict, taking steps to make their life better. And Micha has a whole Torah. He's been here 100 times. We've read his book. I'm sure you've read his book, Catch 67, that you don't do a binary.
Many of his other books as well.
Yes, you don't do a binary of peace or no peace, but you try to make it a little bit more peaceful. Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. They don't bring peace, but they increase peace. And so he has this whole Torah about, okay, so we're not going to have a two-state solution. We're not going to have a handshake on the White House lawn, but we're going to make it more peaceful. And when he had the ear of the Prime Minister, Bennett, for just that nanosecond, that was what they were working on. So is all that wrong? Is the two-state solution not dead? Is the two-state solution viable, in your opinion? Who's talking about that? I haven't heard anybody talk about it.
Well, you invited me.
Yes. So, yeah. Besides you, is anyone actually talking about it? Yeah. And then could you talk about your thoughts about Micha's shrink the conflict?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, I would say I think Micha Goodman is a brilliant person, and in many of his writings, I agree completely, not about shrinking the conflict, and I will explain. I will also say that I was completely supporting this change government that you spoke about, even though, there were many people there who were not my cup of tea, but I thought that they were much better than the alternative. But I think that this shrinking the conflict is an illusion. You can't really shrink the conflict if you don't shrink the Israeli control over the territory. It's not just about money. You don't buy people just with money and with projects. And actually, when you take a car from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and you put it in neutral, which is what this government thought that they're doing, it's still going down, because the gravity of the situation on the ground is when the government doesn't make a decision, the decisions are being made by the spoilers on the ground, either by the terrorists or by settler violence, which is the number that you did not mention when you said 300, but the number of Palestinians, and I'm not talking about terrorists, about non-involved Palestinians that died in that situation of shrinking the conflict, is unbelievable, and it's not reported in Israeli press, unfortunately, except for Haaretz. So I think shrinking the conflict is an illusion. I completely believe that the two-state solution is not dead. The only question is how many people will die before we will get to the two-state solution, and I will explain why it is still feasible very much in my mind.
Please.
First of all, you said Israelis don't believe in the two-state solution. That's not true empirically. In every survey that we do, we see that the plurality of Israelis that support the two-state solution and majority support some kind of separation, even if they don't call it two-state solution. The problem is that the same people who support it don't believe it's feasible. But they don't believe it's feasible because they did not hear any leadership that articulate that vision, and they saw an international community that just gave up, and this can change on the dime. You mentioned Sharon. In Sharon's campaign for prime minister, he said that Gaza and Tel Aviv are the same, and people voted for him because most Israelis are confused about this. No, they're confused because they want to solve it, they don't know how. So when Barak came out of Camp David and we said we don't have a partner, they agreed with him and they followed Sharon. But when Sharon was sitting in the prime minister's office and decided to move out of Gaza, the same Israelis supported him too. And the same Israelis who supported Menachem Begin, who said, no compromise, no territorial compromise. But when the situation changed and Sadat made the move and Carter supported it as an American administration, and I would like to say much more about American leadership.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
This is one of the things that the reasons why I'm in J Street.
Yes.
Israelis supported Begin, the same Begin that said no compromise. So I completely believe that when we will have leadership that will speak about the two-state solution, most Israelis will support it. And we saw it with the Abraham Accords, that Netanyahu actually he did not want Abraham Accords. He wanted annexation. He wanted to use the Trump kind of so-called deal of the century in order to give him permission to annex. And when Kushner realized that no Arab country is going to support the annexation, he convinced Trump to go to normalization. You know, with some transactions, F-35, but we're not going there. And then most Israelis supported the Abraham Accords over annexation because there is no support for the settlers movement as much as people think. Most Israelis are in the center, that they want the separation. They just don't know how to get there, and they could get there if they will see leadership. And the Israeli leadership eventually will get there, but we also need American leadership to get there.
Okay, so we're going to pivot to both of those in a second. But just last question, is there currently any elected Israeli official who's talking about reviving the two-state solution?
Well, first of all, Lapid said it in his UN speech. He said it when President Biden was in the region. He said it, but I have to say that, you know, Lapid doesn't have the sense of urgency that I have about it. In some ways, I would say Lapid is treating it the way that he treats, you know, climate change as something that is awful, but, you know, we can wait.
Right.
I don't think we can wait, because I think that all those Lapid supporters who enjoy living in Tel Aviv, the best city in the world, by the way.
Second most expensive city in the world, by the way. Yes.
Because it's the best city in the world. But I think that they are in denial. Most of them don't know what's happening in Hebron, what's happening in Nablus, and they're in denial in understanding where this is leading us. Because I think that the way they, you know, for me, it's like enjoying the jacuzzi on the Titanic. Because if Israel will keep with the status quo, eventually we will reach this day when we have to choose, are we a democracy or are we a homeland for the Jewish people? We won't be able to be both.
Okay, so let's thank you for super thoughtful and candid assessment. Let's now graft your country's politics and our country's politics into this. Could you give us your assessment of what happened with the Israeli elections, and why is Ben-Gvir and Smotrich a thing?
Yeah, no, it's not easy for me, and I'm known to be an eternal optimist, and I'm still an optimist, because I learned from my mentor Shimon Peres that nobody could really predict the future. Nobody knew about the Arab Spring. Nobody knew about the revolution in Iran. Nobody knew that Sadat is going to come. So the only way to really influence the future is optimism, because without optimism, you only see the threats, you don't see the opportunities, and you don't have the energy. So I'm sticking to my optimism. But what's happening in Israel? First of all, there is a global tendency that actually Micha Goodman wrote about this in another book of his.
Right.
Which has to do with the social networks. It has to do with a reaction to globalization, that people are sticking to their identity and ethnocratic stuff and kind of afraid of the change. And I think we saw it in America,
right.
We saw it with Brexit, we saw it with Bolsonaro, we see it in Orban in Hungary, and we see it in Israel. The problem for me is I can somehow live with the fact that Hungarians choose to be fascist, but when Jews become fascists,
right?
For me that is unexplainable.
Can I ask you a question about what? Again, I'm listening to this with American ears, and I'm wondering why this wasn't disqualifying. And I heard this from the mouth of Ben-Gvir, which is he's holding a muffler or some part of Rabin's car. And he says, this week we got Rabin's car, soon we'll get Rabin. Why didn't that just knock him out?
It did come out, but everything became politicized. Just like here, I think in many senses there is, that some people see their news and they're in their echo chambers and they don't want to hear about other news. And if they hear about their other news, they call it fake news or alternative facts or whatever. But what really coincided with this tendency to ethno-nationalism
right.
and all of that was the Netanyahu situation.
Tell us about that. That's the criminal thing.
So Netanyahu, who's no doubt a brilliant person, but not my cup of tea. And I think that the way he treats American Jews and prioritize evangelical Christians over American Jews, because American Jews tend to be more critical and he prefer people who want all of us to die in Armageddon and all kind of things. But he's still a brilliant person. And for many years, I think that what Netanyahu really wanted is what's good for Israel. In his understanding, not in my understanding, but at some point, it stopped being about Israel. And it started to be about his legal situation.
Getting out of prison, staying out of prison.
Yeah, and when he realized that the only base that could give him that is those fascist, Jewish supremacist, and ultra-Orthodox. I'm not comparing the two, by the way.
Right.
I mean, I'm a secular person, so
right.
I have problem also with the ultra-Orthodox control over Israel, but it's different phenomenon. And he empowered them and actually made them join together politically because he's a brilliant politician. And the fact that we're going to have this government, which, you know, I can't even start to explain, a lot of it is because of the Netanyahu situation.
So can I ask you to resolve a machloket, a disagreement among two people that I love and think so highly of, and they couldn't be more opposite. One is Tom Friedman. I mean, I've been loving Tom Friedman for 40 years. And the morning after Ben Gvir, he writes, "The Israel that we love is gone." Okay? The other person I love dearly, both his ideas and his humanity, he's like the world's greatest mensch, is Danny Gordis. And he writes a piece that week. By the way, his mother just passed away, and he's in Shiva for his mother, but he's such a mensch and so thoughtful. And Danny writes that all this hysteria about Ben Gvir and the nation that we love is gone is not true. And that basically, because he's got to be part of a coalition, that's going to be a moderating influence. And so don't be hysterical. He'll have to be moderated to have any impact whatsoever. Where do you stand on that machloket? Is the Israel that we love gone, or is he going to be modulated? Are you with Friedman or Ben?
So I agree with some points in both theses. I'm much closer ideologically to Tom Friedman than to Daniel Gordis, even though my daughter did her degree in Shalem Institute, and it's a great institute, by the way. Even though it's funded by people who are much more right-wing than me, they're doing a great job. But I think that Tom Friedman is wrong to say Israel, all Israel is gone. It's not gone. We're there, and we're going to fight the fight. And just like many of you did not give up on America when Trump was elected, we're not going to give up on Israel that easy. And I want to remind all of us that actually the popular vote was almost 50-50 in the last elections, but the left was completely disorganized, and we have a lot of soul-searching to do politically. I think also, I think that there are two communities that if we hold hands with, we will be majority and not a minority. Maybe not politically, but as a camp. One of them is you, American Jews, that tend to be much more liberal in your views, and the other is the liberal Arab or Palestinian citizens of Israel. And it was a mistake by the left not to connect with those two groups for different reasons, and I do blame Yair Lapid for some of it, even though I did want him to be prime minister, even if I did not vote for him. So Tom Friedman is wrong. Israel is not gone. We're going to fight the fight, and we're going to win.
Okay.
And as Martin Luther King said, the arc of history is long, but it's bending toward justice, and we will get there. Gordis is wrong because he doesn't understand the leverage that Ben Gvir and Smotrich have on Netanyahu. And I would say that if the situation was different and there was no trial, Netanyahu would probably prefer to somehow bring guns in and keep Ben Gvir and Smotrich outside. He knows that they're going to create so many problems for him with the world, even with his new friends in the Abraham Accords. But he has no choice, because when you're thinking jail or American pressure, he prefers American pressure.
Right. So can I ask you a question? This is just so interesting to me. Surely the 50% of Israel that voted for Bibi knew that he's doing all this crazy stuff to stay out of jail. Wasn't that a problem for them? To vote for somebody who is like making decisions of state based on his own personal welfare to stay out of jail? Why did that not ring their bell?
Well, first of all, not 50% voted for Netanyahu. We don't have a presidential you know, many of them voted for the ultra-Orthodox, many of them voted for the Ben-Gvirirs for different reasons, because in Israel, that's the way our politics work. We vote for a party. Secondly, and I think that I don't have to tell you this as Americans, that many people still think that Biden did not win the elections. Many people think that, you know, that January 6th was the right thing to do. You know, and I think what happened to Likud, to the Likud party, which used to be, you know, not my party, but you had the revisionists, people who really believed in liberal democracy, even if they were more conservative. And you don't find any revisionists in Likud anymore. Dan Meridor, Livni, Olmert, even Rivlin, I'm sure he's not voting Likud anymore, because Likud became a personality cult party. And those people who vote Likud, they think that only Netanyahu, because he's such a political magician, only he could get us to power, only he could give us the jobs that we want, only he can. So they don't care if he's corrupt, as long as he could give them the power. And I think that for Americans, it's not that hard to understand.
So Nadav, just one last question on this unsavory topic. What I'm reading from Israel is, but we're so grateful that you're here to correct the record, is that Ben Gvir appointed this settler, this violent settler kid who's 27, who's been in scraps with the law, who he's 27, he's a settler, and he does hilltop violence, and that he is now responsible for overseeing the police, even though he said of the police that they're anti-Semitic and racist. I mean, that the Jewish police in Israel are anti-Semitic. So you have, it seems like the abdication of personal responsibility, and you have an extremist, I mean, how you have a 27-year-old hilltop violent person overseeing the police that had arrested him and et cetera, is just extremely concerning. And I read about that from the Times of Israel. Tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, so when you read the coalition agreements, it's really frightening. I mean, you're talking about the person that is the biggest provocateur and trying to keep on going on the Temple Mount Haram el-Sharif, which could get the whole Middle East in flame. And not only the Middle East, 1 billion Muslims all over the world, from Indonesia to, you know, Morocco. And he's now in charge of the situation.
And he's 27.
It kind of leads me to the American role, because the only reason why Ben Gvir did get what he wants and Smotrich did not get what he wants, because Smotrich wanted to be the Minister of Defense, was then when the Americans said, listen, the Minister of Defense has a lot to do with the coordination with the US, and there's no way we can accept that. While the police is kind of not foreign policy issue. And I think America has a big role, and the Jewish community in America has a big role in saving us from the lunatics that are going to control the situation. And I mentioned the evangelical Christians that are waiting for Armageddon. What Ben Gvir wants to do is definitely Armageddon.
So talk to us about what we should be doing, in your opinion.
Well, as I mentioned a few times in my service in Washington, and also when I was here in Boston, I learned a lot about American ability to make the world a better place. I was in Washington when the whole Balkan situation was, and I remember that I was in shock that my friends in the State Department believed that they could somehow make former Yugoslavia live in harmony. I said, how can you do that? It's impossible. And they were able to do it. And I think that American leadership had a lot to do with the Good Friday Accords in Ireland. We have a big expert here about negotiations, Professor Sibelius. He can tell you many other cases how American leadership really changed the world. And I believe it can happen. And I believe that the fact is that especially now after the midterm elections and even before the midterm elections, where it's clear that the Biden administration could not really promote any domestic agenda anymore. It's time to go to foreign policy. because in foreign policy, you don't need to have a majority in the House.
Right.
And just like I think the administration was pretty successful in keeping NATO together and even getting Sweden and Finland to want to join and keeping the Ukraine, in shape against Russia, the American administration could achieve a lot in the Middle East if they would be more proactive, because we have a regional situation that is just eager for American leadership.
Right.
The Emirates, I told it when I was in Abu Dhabi, I told them, you don't even understand how much power you have. For the Emirates to tell Netanyahu now, if you go to the Temple Mount, what that means for us here, what that means for our ability to face together Iran, but they don't do it because they're waiting for America to lead it. And I think that for a long time, they told me they can, they have China, they have Russia, but I saw how American administration can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm not talking about boots on the ground. I completely understand why America don't want to send your kids to fight in the Middle East, but just plain diplomacy. We have here an ambassador who knows what diplomacy is. An American diplomacy can make a lot of difference. And I think that in many ways, Biden have the exactly right personality in terms of Israelis, which, for example, Obama did not have, unfortunately, because I think Obama was a friend of Israel, but he could not demonstrate it to Israelis. Well, Biden really knows how to embrace and push at the same time.
Right.
We saw it in May 21, when we had awful violence. Started in Jerusalem, then Gaza, and then in the inner cities in Israel. The Biden administration back then didn't even have an ambassador in Israel. They didn't even have an assistant secretary of state for the Middle East because the Senate wouldn't. And Biden did not want to intervene because he was on his way to a NATO conference. And it was because of the work of J Street and other organizations on the Hill that eventually Biden understood that he has to do something about the violence. And when he intervened, he was able to get a ceasefire in 11 days, unlike the 51 days of the round before, which shows you the potential of American administration ability to change the situation.
Okay, so Nadav, I kind of remember things differently. I remember that Hamas was bombing innocent Jewish civilians. Hamas was trying to murder children. Hamas was trying to murder old people and young people and every people, innocent people, and that, and what I remember is that the president said Israel could fight back. Israel could fight back. And so that was the reason for the delay, which I was personally really grateful for. But I want to talk to you about some...
But can I respond to that?
Please.
Because of course you remember well, Rabbi. Of course Hamas was trying to kill people, but I think that you see a very partial part of the picture.
Please.
Hamas did not want to get involved into this. What happened is several things that started in Jerusalem, actually. It started by Abbas deciding not to have elections. A lot of it by American and Israeli pressure that I think was completely a mistake, because when we don't have Palestinian elections, we don't have a legitimate Palestinian leadership, and you cannot really deal with a non-legitimate leadership. But Hamas thought that, that when Abbas postponed the elections, he created kind of this void. And then you had settler organizations forcing people out of their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, which was pictures all over the Arab and Muslim world. And you saw an internal security minister of Netanyahu, Ohana, who actually wanted some chaos because they thought that this would be good for Netanyahu in the other round of elections. And we had a very inexperienced police commissioner who made all the mistakes possible in Damascus Gate and then in using the police in Temple Mount. And then when the whole Muslim world was in flame about Jerusalem, Hamas said, we will use this opportunity. We will show that it's not Abbas who is in control, we are in control, and they started to shoot. Right. Now, I'm not a spokesperson for Hamas. I think Hamas is a terrorist organization, and I fought Hamas, and it's the right thing to do. But the way to solve the problem of Hamas is not by more missile and more rockets and more planes. We have much stronger military than Hamas will ever had, but we cannot solve this problem with military means only.
So,
the only way to solve the problem of Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran is with diplomacy. And I think that what Biden did very smartly, he understood that to call Israel to stop will not be successful.
Right.
But to go in the room without a lot of fanfare and to tell, find a way to solve this.
Right.
And he was very successful in doing it. He was doing it in the right way. And that's why I believe that there is a lot of potential in this administration that is not being used. And this is one of the reasons why I'm happy to be in an organization that is pushing the administration to do what I believe is the best thing for Israel and for Zionism and for the Jewish people, to use diplomacy to solve this for once and for all.
So that's going to be one of our machlokot l'shem shamayim. I have zero faith and zero confidence in diplomacy because I have seen zero evidence the Palestinians actually want to make peace with Israel. I mean, some do, but it feels like every time there's a move to make peace, there are dead Jews. There is violence, there is bombs, there is rockets, there is dead Jews, there's Sarah Duker, there's Matt Eisenfeld, and that is from Hebron in 1929 through Aryeh Shupak last week. So that's just a machlok l'shem shamayim. We could agree to disagree.
But I really want to address this. Yeah. I really want to address this.
Please.
Listen, one of the things that, again, I learned from Shimon Peres, but I also learned it from my parents, that
I mean, show me the piece.
One second.
Yeah,
it wasn't enough for Zionism to move the Jew out of the shtetl. We still have a lot of work to move the shtetl out of the Jew. And the language which you speak, which I know is very authentic and comes from deep pain and love for Jews, is not the language of Zionism. Zionism is about that we are taking our destiny in our own hands. Are we not taking in the blame game and in victimization? We have the strongest military by far. I can tell you that even statistically, with all the numbers that you gave, more people are dying in Israel from falling in their shower than from terrorism. And the situation is completely not as it used to be in Hebron or even in 48. We're in completely different situation. And I know that there is a tendency of Jewish people, which is very much, because of our past, to see everything through the worst case scenario and to see just the dead Jews. But this is not the whole picture. We just had an amazing agreement with Lebanon. Now, I participated in a war in Lebanon. I know what Lebanon is and what is war with Lebanon. And we had an agreement with Lebanon during the Lapid-Bennett that didn't get much publicity as the Abraham Accords. I don't know why, maybe for political reasons. But this is with a country that we're really at war with. And you know how did we get this peace with Lebanon? Because of American diplomacy. Because someone that you probably don't know his name, called Amos Hochstein, who was the State Department representative who actually made this peace happen. And America can do the same with the Palestinians. And it's true that there are terrorists there. By the way, we have our own terrorists too, but I'm not comparing. And the only way for Israel to achieve what we achieved when Ben-Gurion decided to declare independence, even though he knew that we're going to be attacked by all of our enemies. And what afforded Begin to do the peace with Egypt is we changed this victimization approach of thinking that everybody just hates us and want to kill us. It's not true anymore. We have partners on the other side, and we are making them weak by always talking about the terrorists. And Hamas is around 20 to 25% of the Palestinian society. But Hamas was the one that Netanyahu kept on strengthening in bringing money from Qatar, in releasing the prisoners in the Shalit case. It was all to Hamas, while our real partners who want diplomacy, even though they're not Zionist, are completely ignored.
So Nadav, we'll close this piece. I'll just say, we're in a chapel where we offer prayers. I pray that you're right. I fear that you're wrong. And I have Gaza, 4 wars, and many thousands of missiles on my side. that's what happens when we get out, but maybe what you're saying is right, and maybe the Gaza parallel is different. So, okay. I want to ask...
No, even the Gaza parallel, I want to
Yeah.
remind you, more Jews got killed when we were in Gaza.
Right.
It's numbers, it's empirical, it's not... By the way, what I said about Israel, that the real problems of Israel is diplomatic and not military, is, again, not only me saying it. If you do a survey among all of the former IDF, Mossad, Shabak, they will tell you that the most important thing for Israel's security and Israel identity is diplomacy and achieving a solution with the Palestinians, and not more planes and not more tanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just, last bit of time that we have, I'd love you to address the challenge of campus anti-Semitism, campus anti-Zionism, and if you could imagine a room full of teenagers, of juniors or seniors in high school who are about to go off to Wellesley College or to Oberlin or to Tufts or to Harvard or to NYU, tough places to love Israel, what would you tell them?
Well, thank you for that question, because it's a great opportunity to tell you another reason why I'm in J Street. When I was the Consul General, I was in campuses a lot. I believe that the biggest investment is in young people if we want to really do something about the future. And I will spend a lot of time in campuses. And I heard from many of the Jewish organizations things about what's happening in campuses. And I decided to measure it and do some surveys and check what really is going on. And I found out that a lot of the feeling of people that was completely authentic was not based on anything. For example, I just give you an example as an Israeli diplomat. For many years, Israeli diplomacy was all focused on Middle East faculties. Why? Because there was drama there. There were a lot of lecturers from Arab countries who said bad things about Israel. And then we did a survey and we find out that most of the decision makers in America are coming from business schools and law schools. And we were never there because we were just letting the provocative people to decide our agenda. What happened, what I think that what J Street created and what J Street is creating in campuses is a space where you could be where you could love Israel and be a Zionist and not be in a place where you say, okay, the Israeli government is always right, the Palestinians are bad. And I think this is the space. Yeah, there will always be crazes on the other side. There is a lot of, identity politics on the left that is very problematic. And people who say, if you're a Jew, you're privileged, you can't be part of us. But I think we're overestimating their numbers, and the place to deal with it is not by fighting them and calling them anti-Semites, but by creating a space where people could be open to debate, could be open to nuance, and we could have an ability to care about Israel without saying that the only way to care about Israel is giving up their liberal or progressive values.
So Nadav, let's play a game called word association. I'll say something, and you tell me the first thing that pops to your mind. The Squad.
Okay, so I can tell you that the J Street support many of the progressives in Capitol Hill, but there is one fact that not many people understand. There are 100 progressives in the Progressive Caucus on the Hill. 95% of them are Zionists. Are Zionists in my Zionism, which means they would sign the Declaration of Independence of Israel. They believe that Israel should be strong, and they support military aid or foreign aid to Israel. In the Squad, we have 6 people. 6 people. By the way, they're not all the same. For example, Jamal Bauman, he came to Israel. I was on the trip with him. I saw him crying in Yad Vashem. I saw him hugging people in the Gaza envelope who were victims of, and the reason why we work with him, because he supports the two-state solution and the others not. But let's not exaggerate. The Squad is a small group in the Democratic Party, and we're making them as if they're the whole story. They're not. They're a small group, and J Street don't support them. We support people who support the two-state solution, who support Israel, and support peace, and support democracy.
So, okay, so we are in Vayishlach this week, and Yaakov is wrestling with the angel, and the angel says, gotta go, and Yaakov says, I'm not gonna let you go until you bless me. So we're not gonna let you go until you bless us. Can you give us a blessing? What can we do to be a blessing to our beloved Eretz Israel?
Thank you, Rabbi. I have to admit that I was born in a kibbutz. So the way I bless is not exactly the language that you use as a secular Jew. But I wanna say really to your question that I think the best way to support Israel is to remember that supporting Israel is not just one way. There are many ways to support Israel. And if we define that the only way to support Israel is supporting what the Israeli government is saying, which is now, some people that you mentioned, how problematic there is, we will lose the Jewish community, and we will lose the bond between American Jews and Israel. But if we will open the space and say, okay, those who want to support Israel through the right, that's fine. Those who want to support Israel through the left, that's fine. Those who want to support Israel in a not political way, that's fine. If we'll stop telling people that there's only one way to support Israel, we'll be able to support Israel much more. And the other thing that I would say is don't give up on Israel, because even though we are going to have a very tough government for you to swallow, a government that we spoke about, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, didn't speak about those who think that if you're not Orthodox, you're not a legitimate Jew. And that's also a big problem in my book.
Right.
Even though I'm secular, I believe in pluralism. So don't give up on us. And remember that there are many people in Israel who share your values and want to connect with you, Jews and Arabs. So don't give up on us, and don't give up on Zionism, but don't give up if you have progressive values, because they're not in contradiction with supporting Israel.
So Nadav, I just want to say a deep thank you to you. I want to say,
I don't know what to do. You're too kind. I never had a standing ovation. Enjoy it. Okay.
So I want to say a deep thank you to you, and I will close with a prayer that I hope Temple Emmanuel deepens as a big tent. That's a very Jewish thing. I mean, the Gemara, the Talmud's all there. As you know, every page of Talmud is about reasonable disagreement and the capacity to have good conversations. Obviously we don't agree on some stuff. You obviously know much more than I do, but what I feel, even though it's not as well known, it's not as knowledge-based as yours, is deeply felt, deeply felt. I mean, I was at Matt Eisenfeld's funeral, and I used to go out every week with Sarah Duger's mother, with Arlene Duger. So all that stuff is in me. People are shaped by their personal experience. But I deeply, deeply treasure this conversation. I deeply aspire to have a marketplace of ideas where we can continue. And I guess my ultimate prayer, I'll offer the prayer, I hope we all go to Israel soon. I hope we all go to Israel. There is nothing more powerful than being in Israel. Go to Israel, and we'll continue the conversation there. Nadav, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to pop in for just one moment. Thank you all so much for being here. We have 2 clipboards in here and 2 out by desserts. If you would like to stay in touch or get more information, please sign up. You can use any of the clipboards. Your name should be on there if you registered. If not, you can fill it in. If you're on live stream, please send me an email if you'd like to be in touch. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.